Today, let's talk about a tool called Powerboard, which I've been trying out for a few months now, and which I think provides a really good addition to your FinOps practice, and not just your FinOps practice, but your overall cloud governance practice, particularly when it comes to Azure. As you know, I do a lot of writing, talking, and video making about cost optimization, cost control, cost management on the Azure platform. I've even written a book about it. And one of the important things that I think you need as part of your FinOps journey is some solid tooling that allows you to distribute the task of observability to an entire team. Now, before I get to Powerboard, let's just take a quick look at the Azure cost analysis interface, which is good. That's why I actually wrote a book about it. And it gives you a number of views of your data and different ways of slicing and getting insight into the sources of your cost. That is all fantastic. The question becomes, how friendly is this interface? How friendly is this mode of interacting with your cost data to other members of your team, non-technical members of your team, for example? And I think this is where Powerboard comes in. So let's go over to Powerboard real quick. Username and password combo, which, of course, in that case, the identity and access management is being managed by the Powerboard team, or integrate it directly with your Azure tenant, which is what I have done. And that is done by creating a service principal that grants the application, the Powerboard application, access to a particular subscription or subscriptions that you granted access to. So since I've already created that service principal and made the connection, let me just click this and let that churn for just a few moments and log in to the account, because it already knows that I'm cached in another tab on this browser, and let this cook for a little bit. Great. So now you see the subscription that has access to, or rather the subscription that I have connected Powerboard to via the service principal. And I can just click on it right here. And we're taken to the home page. Now, one of the first things you'll notice about this home page is that it combines cost information with governance information and security and compliance status. In other words, it's creating a kind of overall view at a glance of some of the most important items, really, I'd argue almost all the important items that are relevant for managing your Azure environment, including recommendations, secure score-based data, and a really good breakdown of the way that resources are being used within the environment. It's a good way to get like an inventory, but this is just the home view. We can actually make this a little simpler, a little more friendly, I think, for an executive view, because this is a great overview, but it is possible to simplify it even further and go to the dashboard view by clicking that. And so this gives you something that you can actually show to leadership, to management, regarding your status, the last month's cost, forecast costs. Of course, this is derived directly from the Azure API, the cost and billing API. Your secure score, which is a very nice feature, that it's pulling data from that API as well. The number of virtual machines. Virtual machines are still, of course, one of the most popular use cases for cloud, even though obviously we have other options now, PaaS and serverless. But many organizations that are making the transition to cloud do so by first deploying a number of virtual machines. So it's good that this is a top line item here. And other important features such as detached resources, that is to say, resources no longer in use, but which may still be generating cost, some security checkpoints, an overall view of how much storage you're using by the terabyte, and the number of resource groups within the subscription. And by the way, this is the view for this specific subscription that has access, or rather that we've given Powerboard access to via the Surface principle. So we can go back home, and then you see the contrast with this richer interface here. Now, this is good, and you can, as you can see, you can drill down on some items here. So for example, let's see, 17 vulnerabilities and so forth, or rather deleted and created resources. But it's also possible to use the executive summary view to take a look at cost and compliance. I really like this view a lot because there have been a number of situations, many situations actually, in which you were asked questions by the business regarding your status. So for example, if you are a financial services firm, or any firm, obviously, because we all have security concerns, it's good to know what your status is at a glance. And it is possible, of course, to drill down. Of course, all of this information is available from the Azure portal, but in separate interfaces. What Powerboard is doing is bringing all of these things together under a single umbrella, or as the saying goes, a single pane of glass. And I think that is actually quite valuable because it gives you the ability to have a kind of a control pane, or rather a control center for your Azure tenant and for the subscriptions that you've given this access to. The recommendations are listed here. Now, bear in mind that the subscription that this is connected to is actually fairly modest, and in fact, to save costs, I deleted artifacts after a period of time. So there are things that would appear, say, in a more active subscription that are not appearing here. Now let's take a look at the cost interface specifically. This is a very rich interface because it breaks it down, or rather it breaks down the sources of costs for you by category. For example, resource utilization. And note that you can also download these items as either a PDF or a spreadsheet for your own analysis using tooling outside of Powerboard, which is nice. Let's say, for example, you use Tableau or Power BI. It is possible to download data regarding these resource utilization and cost distribution so that you can use another tool besides Powerboard. I always like a tool that provides you with flexibility. Inventory is really very nice because I've been in many environments in which people, after a while, after things have been deployed at scale, really have no idea what they've deployed, and it's difficult to collect that data. Or there's no centralized way of actually collecting that data, or you collect the data, and of course it's difficult to parse. And so it's nice that that this is brought under the umbrella. And again, it is possible to download for analysis using your preferred tooling outside of Powerboard. Tagging is a critical part of a FinOps practice and cost management so that you can tie the usage of your cloud artifacts to what they're actually for. In this case, I did not have many items tagged, and I did this on purpose to kind of show off contrast. You can see that lots of stuff is untagged, and so you could imagine a situation in which you use this interface in order to show progress against a tagging effort, which would be key to gaining business insight into the reasons that you're using your Azure assets. And other items, such as your Cost Explorer, which is quite nice, because now you can have an idea of what actually costs the most and the percentage of the cost generated by the particular category of artifact. So in my case, I deployed fairly modest SQL Server environment, Azure SQL environment, and you see what percentage that was of the spend. Storage disks, no storage disks are extant right now, so nothing shows up. And also, this is dependent upon the connection of analytics made available through Azure Monitor, which I did not connect. But if you do, then you'll have a fairly rich amount of information here. And again, back to the cost dashboard for a second. I like the way that the data is being distributed here because, again, it is possible to have sort of an overall discussion with leadership regarding the sources of costs, and if you have a good tagging strategy, what's happening there, like the top 5 tags, or rather the top 5 costs per tag, and by resource group, which is, and you'll see that, as I said, the SQL resources that I built generated on a daily basis a higher rate of cost burn than the virtual machines that I deployed. Once you've had a year of this, you can see your cost trend, which is quite nice. The average cost, the daily cost, and savings that have been savings that you've actually enjoyed. And in my case, there's nothing. Region with the highest cost. Well, I'm not quite sure why this data is not available. That's something that I can follow up with the Powerboard team, but it may be that I only used one region for this test situation, although I'd have to verify that to know for sure. Change history. Resources that have been deleted and resources that have been created. Tracking deletion and creation is another important way to track the sources of costs. Now, because this is over the last 24 hours, it defaults to 0. But if I change it to 7 days or perhaps 30 days, then we actually start to get some data. In a more robust or busy environment, you can imagine there'd be quite a bit of data here. And then with this data, you'd have the opportunity to actually ask questions regarding what's happening within the environment. Storage, you can take a look at storage that's been used, storage that's been deployed. Again, I think that one of the most valuable things here is the combination of inventory with cost. So it's possible for you to gather inventory data while you're also exploring the sources of cost per the actual items, the artifacts that have been deployed. So just a tour of the inventory, a cost explorer of the sources of cost and the percentage of the cost generated by the various storage types that have been deployed. And I deleted, so this is why this isn't showing up. And I also have not activated the relevant Azure service to gather the vulnerability data. Because Powerboard is actually deriving the data from what is made available via the various APIs that are exposed from Azure, or made available, I should say, from Azure. So if there's something you haven't turned on, then Powerboard is unable to actually pull the data. Let's take a look at security. Another very good, very simple interface that provides you with something that can be used to shape your response to security issues within your environment. My secure score is actually not that great. It's not that bad, but there's really, as I said, not much going on within the environment. So at this point, so I wouldn't expect anything to appear here. In a busier environment, of course, there'd be a lot more data. And again, it is possible to download results as either a PDF in report format or as a spreadsheet for ingestion by another tool. And then going to the left here, we see the other areas, such as a separate division just for virtual machines, which, as I mentioned earlier, because virtual machines still comprise a large percentage of the workloads that are deployed to public cloud generally and into Azure, particularly perhaps, because many companies who have large Microsoft investments on premises migrate into those workloads, perhaps as is, to the cloud, to Azure, and modernize them after they've been migrated. And so virtual machine costs are a significant percentage of the runtime costs that companies generate. And so it's good to have a separate virtual machine hive here, but also, or area here, but also a way to do an inventory. And I've said this quite a few times because, as I mentioned earlier, inventory is, in addition to understanding the sources of costs, is something where I see a lot of companies struggling. And once again, it is possible to download the results for analysis outside of Powerboard and the vulnerability assessment, which of course it made available if you've turned on the appropriate vulnerability analysis tools on Azure, thereby making that data available via the API, and also the change history, which is modifications over time. Networking is another area of cost, of course. For example, if you have resources distributed across regions, across availability zones, you may indeed generate some interesting costs. And again, also inventory. You'll notice that this is a theme with the Powerboard interface, is that you're not only getting the data that you need, the aggregate data that you need, but you're also getting an inventory. Now, for me, there's nothing interesting here because I have not deployed any of these artifacts, and I actually deleted, to save costs, some virtual networks. And I did have a network interface, and I did have load balancers, but I got rid of them, because I didn't want to rack up a very large bill. And actually, Powerboard helped me to track that, to track the billing data. Here's a really, really nice feature that I think is perhaps unique to Powerboard, which is this report center, in which in one interface, you see some of the major items, such as the cost data, chargeback data, and that would be if you've done the appropriate tagging, your change history, your compliance inventory, resource utilization, virtual machines. These are all the heavy hitters, I would say. And it's fantastic to have just this area of the interface that allows you to simply download things. So you could very quickly answer questions from leadership, from finance, for example, who maybe people don't want access to this interface. And so you can very quickly just sort of download relevant data without having to hunt and peck within the Azure Cost Analysis interface for the appropriate source of download, because it is possible to download from here as well, but it does take quite a bit of navigation to get all of these relevant types of data. A separate hive for compliance, because perhaps there are members of the team who are only interested in compliance and who are not part of the cost optimization or technology optimization team. There is a interface just for that group, which is, again, fantastic, utilizing the security benchmark resources available through Azure and all of the various benchmarks, such as CIS and NIST and HIPAA for the US, that Azure makes available. There are other aspects here that are not activated for me yet because I haven't configured them, such as taking a look at cloud user accounts derived from Azure AD, so that's something that I can follow up on. And the recommendations engine, because I haven't configured that, and user management. Let's go back to the home page. So in conclusion, I would say that Powerboard, which is constantly in development and constantly being updated, looks to me to be a fantastic addition to your tooling for managing your Azure environment. And I recommend that you definitely give it a try. Thank you for watching.